Bless you, my son.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we are back together once again for another episode in our Biblical Theology project. This time, we are planning to discuss Deuteronomy chapters 20 through 23, and I am excited to dig into this section of God's Word with the regular team. Let's go ahead and bring in Greg first this time. I think we had you last time. So, Greg, how's it going?
I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to getting into these important chapters, and yeah, I couldn't be more excited.
I know what you're doing.
No, you don't. I'm excited.
Was that said in mockery?
Yeah.
Even when I'm opening myself up to you guys, I get this.
Yeah, don't do that anymore.
When we say to Eric, how you doing? You just want to say ditto or what? Eric, I mean, what's? I see your dog running around in the back there.
Yeah, we have a guest this episode. My puppy Lola is in the room, and I'm really hoping she behaves.
Maybe she'll have something to contribute with barks and other things. I don't know. But anyway, it's good to have you as well. And let's hear from Brother Micah, although I think he already piped in, so no secret that he's here as well. But Micah, good to see you again. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I can't be too enthusiastic. Greg already sucked all the oxygen out of the room with that, so.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Joe, how are you? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
That's my question for this episode.
Tell us.
How are you, Joe?
So if you're not familiar with the content of Deuteronomy 20 through 23, feel free to pause the video and go ahead and read through those things because, we won't be able to talk about everything. We are handling 4 chapters today, so it's a little bit more than normal. Anyway, I want to get us started in chapter 20. And we had a conversation previously about the priest's role in going with the army. And Micah, you had said something that I'd never really heard before. It was interesting about the potential like military chaplaincy kind of view. But then in chapter 20, verses 1 through 4, we see the priest having an explicit role with the military. Does this shape anything about what we talked about before? And again, maybe it just confirms what we said, or any additional thoughts as we had discussed it, and now we're getting some additional responsibilities of the Levites with the military.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of supports that spiritual support role that they're there for. They're there for that I articulated before. I mean, they're supposed to, when they draw near to battle, verse 2, the priest will come forward and speak to the people, and shall say to them, "Hear, O Israel, today you're drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart be faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you the victory." He's drawing their confidence toward God and his promises, not to rely on themselves or their own strength. And that's why they don't need to be afraid. I think this kind of supports that at least one of their functions in the midst of these people was to be a spiritual support, drawing them into the presence of God to rely upon him.
Yeah, amen. I agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree too. The priest encouraged the soldiers to not be afraid and reminded them that God was with them, which he promised to be. So the priest is reminding them of what God has already promised. And I think if a layperson said this, it probably wouldn't have the same effect. The words of a priest who served very near to God would probably have been more powerful and effective than just anybody saying it. So I think there's definitely some thought behind this law.
Well, continuing on with this theme of kind of the military stuff, I've never served in the military. I've said that before, but I have the utmost respect for people who have served in the armed forces, and I'm thankful for that. I know a couple of you guys have served in the military. Eric, I don't think you haven't served in the military, right? Yeah.
No, I have not.
So you and I have not, but Greg and Micah, you guys both have served in the military. And so as far as I know, there is no military exemption like what we read in chapter 20, verses 5 through 8. I was wondering, of course, Eric, I'm interested in your thoughts as well, but I'm especially interested in you guys who have served in the military, what you think of these exemptions that were given for people from having to fight in the battles.
Yeah, I think... man, wouldn't that have been nice, right? I didn't enjoy these benefits.
I do people that were deployed and had babies born while they were deployed, and they didn't get to go home or anything.
Wives who got pregnant while men were deployed. Yeah, all kinds of situations.
That's unfortunate.
Really. Well, it isn't a laughing matter, but yeah, no. But this is the difference, right, between a professional standing army that a country maintains, and the army of, like, when you go fight, when the trumpets sound and everybody has to go, there are reasons for not everybody going, right? There are morale reasons. There are more practical reasons listed here. But the difference, I think, between them and the role that I filled, I was a volunteer standing army. This is my job every day of the week. So just because I decided to get married, or just because I happened to have a pregnant wife, didn't mean that I was exempt from that deployment or that service. So,
yeah. And doesn't this kind of shouldn't this be layered into the broader theme that we already saw at the beginning of what the priests are supposed to say to the people? The emphasis is, do not fear, do not panic, do not be in dread of your enemies, because God is the one who fights for you and he will give you the victory. And then all this stuff about, if there's any man who's built a new house and not dedicated it, or if any man's fearful, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't it seem like God is saying, I am so able to give you the victory here? Even if you aren't at full capacity, even if you don't have all the personnel you could possibly have. Yeah, actually, you can let some people go home if they want to. Doesn't it seem like there's an emphasis here on God's ability to give the victory to his people, regardless? That's what my mind was drawn to.
But I think there's more. I think there's a little bit more going on, though. At least there's more that I think we ought to consider. We in the West, especially Americans, have not experienced a war that threatens our homes, that threatens our children and wives, and so I think we should. I think we should keep in mind the idea that someone can go, "Oh, I'm just afraid, so I'm out of here." I actually agree with pulling that kind of person out, but I think you'd be less inclined to go, well, I'm just scared with, okay, well, understand that if we lose, it's your wife, it's your children. I think the motivation to put aside that fear, I mean, if you are that person who are like, no, but I'm scared, like, you're the last person we want here. Not because you're because we're all, I mean, I don't know. I never experienced any direct combat, but I imagine to some level, everybody had to overcome fear. But if you understood that you were so afraid that if they take this hill, it's your family that's gone, and you're still like, no, I'm too afraid, we probably don't want you there.
Yeah. So there is a measure of, I mean, there are certain things that you could do to get yourself kicked out of like an operation or something like that. Even in our armed forces, like if you are unable to do your job because you are so gripped with terror, you're going to get removed from any team that's going to do something so fast. So that's, that's true, but that's not the only caveat that's given here. If you build a new house and haven't dedicated it, it's like, even if there's other things that you could be doing that could take a higher priority than this, almost, you don't need to worry about it because God has this. God has this. God will defend you.
Yeah, those are really good points. I just had one little thing to add, and it kind of goes along with what you guys are saying. So the priest is encouraging the soldiers and telling them, don't fear, God's with you, he's going to fight for you. But then in verses 5 through 7, he mentions this repeatedly. You might die. In verses 5, 6, and 7, it says that 3 times. You might die. So the encouragement, I think, is not. There's no possible way we're going to get any casualties here, but just like that, God's going to give the victory. And it is possible that some are going to die. So if there are these other things going on in your life, feel free to tend to those things.
Yeah, I think that's a good addition as well. So I didn't have anything to add. I just I was mostly curious in your guys' thoughts who have actually served in the military. I read this with one perspective, but for you guys who served, I wondered if you would have gladly taken any of these caveats and maybe exempted yourself.
Most of the people that I worked with, because this was our job, right? We were a professional military, fully staffed all the time, and so the idea of going to war and going to do your job, you're like, yeah, this is what I trained for, and this is what I've done all this spin up for. And the people who would use these kinds of excuses, and again, in our eyes, right or wrong, God has provided these, so they're good reasons. We would have seen this as excuses, and so we would have browbeat and harassed and made up colorful nicknames for anybody who would have taken any one of these.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I wonder if this would influence anything. Like, you guys weren't drafted. You guys voluntarily
Volunteer force,
entered. And so because we have a volunteer force, if I'm remembering correctly, everybody who was over the age of 20 and a male was kind of conscripted
Obligated.
into this
Exactly.
service.
Yep.
And so these exemptions it's kind of like a middle path between a voluntary fighting force and a draft, because it's, you are kind of drafted in, but you could exempt yourself from it without having to, break your own foot or flee to Canada or something like that, like other people have tried to do, to flee the draft when it's happened, in the past. And I'm not saying that with any judgment. Like I say, I wasn't drafted either, and I didn't voluntarily serve. So, my reasons wouldn't have been as good as this for not wanting to go into the military. I just wanted to do something. I wanted to do something else and let you guys fight my battles for me, so I could go and do whatever I wanted to do. So thanks for doing that, by the way.
I didn't fight anything. I checked a lot of IDs, but
Sure. Well, you would have had to fight had the circumstance come up. So I would not have. You would have checked the IDs for the people that were going to fight my battle on my behalf. So again, my thank you still stands.
Yes, appreciate your service.
Yes. So that's all I had.
Yeah, I had a question, and this is a question that came up because I heard a very prominent Christian apologist use a verse from this chapter to make the case that, Israel could have made peace with the Canaanites had they, had the opportunity come up. And so I thought that was kind of bizarre that they would bring that up, and maybe I'm revealing my cards here. But so the chapter includes laws of warfare that required the Israelites to first offer enemy cities terms of peace rather than immediately laying siege to them. So that they had to offer terms of peace. They couldn't just simply come and start wreaking havoc and destroying everything. However, Deuteronomy 7:2 forbids making a covenant with a Canaanite nation. So my question is, do these commands contradict each other? Was the Christian apologist I heard on TV, was he right that these laws apply to Canaanite cities? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think reading the rest of the chapter makes it pretty obvious, or at least it does in my mind. The cities in question in verse 10 are not the same cities that are being given to the people in the land. So this is outside of or later on. Verse 16, again, I think makes that clear. Only the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance. You shall not leave anything alive that breathes. You shall utterly destroy them. So I think these are categories. And so,
yeah,
and as is usually the case, blending categories yields unhelpful results.
it's drawing a distinction between cities that are outside the boundaries of the promised land that God had granted to them, and cities that are inside the promised land, which God had granted to them. They were to devote everything in the promised land to the ban, which is kind of it's almost ceremonial language, but like an offering to the Lord, total destruction. It's almost like a burnt offering, if you will. But that they were never told to just universally conduct warfare that way throughout their entire history. This is one of the ways you can also say that, like, the warfare that you see in the Old Testament is not unjust. There were particular reasons that God wanted the cities within the land of Canaan to be treated in a certain way, and his ways with them were just. That is not given as a universal rule for cities outside of that promised land.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's why I was really surprised that this guy used this to basically make the Canaanite wars sound less than they were. So I was
saying
really
that
surprised.
people on TV don't always have the right answer.
Well, in this
suggesting?
particular case, no, he didn't have the right answer.
I believe everything I see on TV.
There's
It's
wisdom there.
thoroughly vetted. How could it get on TV if it's not true?
Exactly. Someone's controlling it.
My last question was at the very end of this chapter then. as they're engaging in warfare, they're allowed to cut down trees to build siege works and things like that, but they're prohibited from cutting down fruit trees. It's kind of an interesting throw in. You guys have any thoughts as to why they're prohibited from cutting down any tree that would bear fruit?
Well, the previous verse just says that while they're laying siege to a city, they can eat from the fruit trees. So it provides a food source, and so there's just a practical reason there. Beyond that, I don't have an answer, but I just took it that far and that far only.
I think the practicality remains even beyond the time of the warfare. Like, once this is done, you want a productive land, and so now you don't have to wait 3-4 years or whatever it takes for a fruit tree to start bearing fruit.
They couldn't eat it till the 5th year.
That's right. I forgot.
Well, I was going to say that when you see fruit trees, you have to take it all the way back to Genesis. Look at I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, don't go there.
I just wanted to really make Greg's face red for a second.
You can say any dumb thing you want. I fully support it.
Well, certainly there are spiritual analogies that are drawn to this, and I was curious if any of you guys are going to do that.
No, I don't think that this one is one that warrants that. But I do think there's a practical reason, and even more maybe something a little bit deeper than the practical reason. Earlier on in the Pentateuch, God makes the point that I'm going to give you cities that you didn't build. I'm going to give you all these things that you didn't establish. And I'm going to give them to you as a gift, and you're going to know that it was from my hand, essentially, is what he's saying to them. This could fit very well into that. Don't cut these things down, don't replant them, eat from them, and enjoy the benefit of what I'm giving you. It's there might be a subtle theological point there, but I wouldn't press that too hard. It would connect with other things that have been said about their entering the promised land.
Well, let's move into chapter 21, and I have a question. In that chapter, verses 10 through 14 will undoubtedly rub some people the wrong way, offend people's modern sensibilities. And this is talking about taking a wife from a group of people that you conquer. So if you were discussing this passage with an offended person, and I have, what would you say to them if they're complaining about, this is so unfair, this is cruel, this is this is not loving or whatever? How would you guys respond to some of the critical feedback that you might get?
We could kill all the beautiful women if you'd prefer that.
Yeah. Would you rather she have died? She's giving an opportunity. They're giving her an opportunity to assimilate and belong to the people of the Lord. Once again, that entire objection supposes this kind of relativism that I just can't abide. It's not true that you can't know which God to serve. It's not true that you can't know the truth. No, there is only one true God, and these people are being given an opportunity to assimilate into this culture, this people that belongs to the Lord. She can shave her head, pare her nails. She could still grieve the loss of her family members. Okay? This is actually a very gracious thing that's being allowed. And then she can belong to the people of God. What more do you want? Your life is being spared.
That would be my answer. Here are the choices, right? She can be put to death, or I can look at her and go, wow, that's a beautiful woman. I think I'm going to take her as my wife, and she's going to be afforded all the rights and privileges that come along with that. Maybe some people would argue being my wife is a worse punishment than death. In which case,
you said it.
There you go. So
kill me.
Pick your poison.
She says, "I choose death."
Okay,
I'm gonna stay in this burning house instead.
The alternative's way worse. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, your question is a good one, Eric. Obviously, all of us have had conversations with people, who are offended by various parts of Scripture. This is clearly one of them. And, before our passage discussion is over today, we'll hit on another one that if this didn't offend them, certainly the other one probably would. My goal is never to, the way you ask the question, I know you're not I know you don't mean it this way, but my goal is never to just try and explain everything in a way that won't be offensive to some people. And, some people will go, oh, this is awful. Well, yeah, I mean, why is any of this happening in the first place? Let's just take the biblical worldview at its face. This is happening because sin is ugly and nasty, and there are, death and things that aren't good do come from this world being broken. And so, this group that is losing this land because they're sinful people, that God is bringing judgment upon them, death is what is coming. So for some people to be spared, now you're going to say that this is horrible. I guess your alternative is that we live in a candy cane land where everything is, unicorns and puppy dog tails and there's no problems. Well, I mean, give me a break. That's not a biblical view. That's just not the world that we live in. There are broken aspects to this world, and sometimes the solutions aren't good. If you go to a doctor and they're like, you have cancer or you have gangrene, and we got to cut off your, this appendage, that is a severe answer to a severe problem. And you might say, well, I don't want that to be the solution. Okay, well, we're just not in that realm. And this is tough. It's tough to read. As a Christian, it's tough to read. But what you guys said is true. And the alternative is just, can't all cultures abide? Aren't all cultures the same? Isn't it okay that this group is just in here burning their children to their false god, and drinking blood and doing all these? I mean, literally, we are told that this land was filled with people that were having sex with animals, murdering their children to their false gods, engaged in all the things that the law told them. When you go in, don't do these things, because the people in that land did all of these things. It's an ugly solution to an ugly problem, and hopefully the result of it is more righteousness in the land. It's a tough passage, and I don't know that there's a way that I can, one of the people who are just trying not to offend, that's when they end up, well, let's just unhitch from the Old Testament in general. I'm not going to do that. None of you guys are going to do that. So, unfortunately, sin is ugly, and some of the results of sin are very ugly. And this is not a beautiful, I'm not going to say that this is beautiful, but it's a severe solution to a severe problem.
So I think you can actually see an element of beauty in it if you contrast it with what would have been common practice for warfare and the spoils of warfare in the ancient world. Like, what God doesn't say is you can take all these women as sex slaves. He does not say that.
Right.
He says you could take one as your wife, and you can be covenanted to her and take care of her and treat her as your betrothed. Like, she's covenanted to you now. She's not your sex slave. She's not chattel to you. She has been fully assimilated as one of your own.
Compare that to other world religions.
Exactly. That's significantly
compare that to other world religions that are still around today.
Exactly.
I mean, your point by contrast is certainly true. I agree with it. I just don't know that if you say this to someone who's offended, I just don't know that they leave that conversation unoffended because you said that.
Those same people are the people that want to soft pedal and use kid gloves with Islam, which, by the way, a lot harsher than this.
The people that complain about these types of passages also believe that almost everybody in the world is very good. There's some stragglers here and there, but they have the naive view that everybody is more or less a good person. The evil people are the exception, not the rule, and we could easily all just get along if we all just believe in each other and hug and things like that. I mean, you have to be a level of naivety that is shocking to think that that's possible, especially in a primitive culture like this. And this has been most of history until relatively recently. So
relatively recently, only in particular places on Earth, just happens to be the place that we are blessed to live.
Right, exactly. We're privileged enough to not be saturated in this type of culture
because it is still happening. If you're willing to, open your
absolutely.
Your eyes.
And if you were saturated in that kind of culture, this looks mild. That's just the fact of the matter.
Looks
this
gracious.
Is incredibly
mild,
merciful.
Gracious.
Yeah, incredibly merciful.
Okay, so I'm not banging any drum here. Wondering what your thoughts are on why she should have to shave her head.
Now, when you couch it like that, you are banging the drum.
I'm not banging. I just said I wasn't banging a drum. This is the absence of drum banging.
You could have just asked the question without that couching of the language.
Because someone would have went, okay, Greg, why the fingernails? And I would have went, I don't know.
All right. Well, why the fingernails?
I don't
Greg?
know.
Okay.
So I think, and this is what most of the commentators I've read say as well, it's a symbolic act demonstrating separation with what was and an embrace of the new identity as belonging to this new people. Broad strokes, that's what I think it symbolizes.
I've heard that interpretation. I think it's entirely. I'm not a scholar or an expert on it, so I'm at their mercy. That seems reasonable to me, especially given the context. Another possibility is that it's a sign of mourning. Shaving your head was at times a sign of mourning, and that's what she does. She's allowed to mourn for a month for her deceased loved ones, and so it's possible. It's actually possible it's both of those things at the same time. So I'm open to either one, both.
Yeah, like you guys, I'm not an expert in this. I won't pretend like I have some insight that isn't afforded to me. And as I read like a note, the NET Bible says that this requirement for the woman to shave her head may symbolize. I recognize that the language that even those who are more of an expert than I am and who present these things still couch it in language that is uncertain. So I don't really know. Just like the fingernails, Greg, I don't know this. So why don't you tell us what you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert either. Building upon potentially systematic understandings that we might come across later on, perhaps this is a symbolizing a change of authority. You were under this individual's authority. You belong to this people. Now we're resetting that situation, and you're coming under a new authority. You belong now to this people.
Maybe. I appreciate that. That's a good, interesting thought to consider.
So okay, and I
doubt it, but you know.
Oh man, I wish I had done that to you. That would have been so much funnier.
I have no reason to doubt that any more than the other ones. So I won't state it as strongly as Eric just did.
It's better having said it so. Doubt it.
No,
that sounds dumb to me.
That was delightful.
Okay. Well, let's move on after I've been shamed. Verses 18 through 21. Does this prescription for taking your son out and having him killed for being stubborn and rebellious, do you think this is talking about a younger son, somebody not yet come of age? Is this an adult son? How does the potential age of the individual change how we see this law?
I think that, I don't want to read personal experience into this, but I think that for something to be raised to the level where a parent is willing to like formally bring the kind of charge publicly against their child that would be necessary to do this kind of thing, the behavior would be have to be pretty egregious, pretty shameful, and there would have to be a high degree of moral culpability on behalf of that person.
So you're suggesting an older child, like possibly an adult child?
Maybe, but once again, adult in ancient times does not mean the same thing as adult today. We prolong childhood in our culture. So like, you meet people in their young 20s, in their low 20s, who are basically like mentally, they think like children, right? We prolong the state of immaturity. And we have this sort of artificial window of adolescence in the modern world that they did not recognize in these cultures. They had childhood and adulthood. You can even see that reflected in some of the Jewish practices still about bar mitzvahs and whatnot. So perhaps this would have been a young adult who is engaging in behavior that is just shameful to a maximum degree, and degrading to his family and all that stuff. I just know as a parent, in order to actually bring this kind of charge against your child, your blood, it would have to be like something really, really serious. I don't think it's just me saying, hey, to my daughter, hey, you need to throw away your garbage, and her saying, I don't want to throw away my garbage.
That's
you know?
it. We're going outside the camp.
Right. Like, I don't think it's that, you know?
Yeah, I guess, and I'm still interested to hear what the other guys have to say, but I find it interesting that my guess is most of you will say something along the same lines of, well, they have to be mature enough. Well, okay. Yeah, I agree. My 3-year-old probably doesn't need to be taken outside the camp because he's stubborn and rebellious. That's kind of the nature of 3-year-olds, in case you didn't know. But at the same time, so now you've hit this age, and maybe the age of accountability, where now you're dealing with an adult. And if I'm an adult, don't I have the right to tell my dad, no, I'm just not gonna do that because I'm a grown man. I can do what I want, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that there's at least some verbal cues in here that are interesting. I don't think it's talking about a 3-year-old. It's talking about, going to gluttony, being a drunkard. I mean, how's your 3-year-old going to be a drunkard?
Yep.
And the
You've never met my 3-year-old.
that community.
that's a
line
reflection.
Really.
That's a reflection on you, Micah. The verse 18 has this additional phrase, and they discipline him to no avail. And so I see a process here that, I would think this seems to imply to me that this process has been exhausted. That, okay, we recognize that foolishness is, bound up in the heart of our children. And so we try and lovingly...
That's a demerit.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. We try and lovingly point them in the right direction. We try and drive this foolishness from them and try and, encourage them to walk in the way of wisdom. We think back to the great commandment that we talked about from Deuteronomy 6, the Shema, and what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to instruct our children. We're supposed to talk about God's word. And, there are opportunities, as long as our children are heeding us and paying attention to us, unless you're raising a sociopath, at least from a young age, children do listen to some degree to their parents. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be stubborn and rebellious to a degree, but not, I don't think, to what is being described here in this passage. And so I think that this is, where is the end of this passage? I feel like if a parent gets to the point where they're like, we have tried everything and our child just won't, they can't, they are a fool in the true biblical sense. They cannot be corrected. To get to that point, I don't think is a fast process. I don't think anybody's getting there by 3 years old. And I've had plenty of 3-year-olds in my house. Some of them have been much more stubborn and obstinate than others. Others have had a stronger will than others. Others have been more rebellious than others. But none of them have ever been able to tax, our patience as parents to the same degree that maybe a 16 or 17-year-old could if they persisted in some of those things. Certainly not to the degree that like a 25-year-old could. Things that are cute in a 2-year-old are not cute in a teenager, and they're downright despicable in 20 or 30-year-olds, and destructive and dangerous. And so to me, again, as I read this, I wouldn't put an age on it. I wouldn't want to open the door for the age of accountability stuff, Greg, although I'm not sure I don't think that's wrong to do it. I wouldn't have gone there personally. But I tend to read a real process into verse 18, and they discipline him to no avail. So the NET said, I don't know how the New American Standard says it. He will not even listen to them, or they chastise him and he won't even listen to them. Like, that does seem to be an older child. Your 3-year-old's going to listen to you if you chastise them, to at least some degree.
This is going to give me demerit. This reminds me of sort of Eli and his sons. They were doing other stuff that was just clearly a violation of God's law too, as priests. But there was a level to which, like, they could not even be reasoned with by their father, and they were adults. Like,
seems to me like he didn't try like he should have.
Right. So there's definitely fault on his part too there. Yeah. But like, had he tried, we could speculate. Had he tried and they persisted, still, would this have been an appropriate thing for that? Perhaps, So that's just one biblical example.
God thought
maybe.
so.
Yeah. Well, good example, definitely a full demerit. And as we read a passage like this, this is just like the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I don't think that this type of a thing is in the law so that parents can have an excuse to go, kill their teenagers. Like, I just don't think that that's why this is here. This does show the severity, though, of these problems of rebelliousness, that this isn't cute. In America, really, I don't know. I've been, the only other country I've been to, well, I guess I've been to Canada and Mexico. But like when I went
Canada's
to Ethiopia,
country.
You said it. I remember witnessing to this guy in Ethiopia, and I was going through the 10 Commandments with him, and he had no problem admitting that he had lied and stole it and lusted and hated and all this other kind of stuff. But I asked him about disobeying his parents, and he got furious with me. He was furious. And this culture just did not tolerate any kind of backtalk to parents. And it is not like if I go to Walmart or something like that, I'm assured that I will see some kid mouthing off to their parents and the parents, arguing with the kids like they're all a bunch of children together, just fighting with each other over, can we get the Skittles or can we not get the Skittles or whatever else. In Ethiopia, these kids were not talking back to their parents. And for this grown man, the idea that he had ever even entertained the thought of dishonoring his parent was, he was furious with me for even asking the question. And he was my driver, so we drove in silence for a while. And after no kidding, 35 minutes of silence, it might have even been longer, he eventually said, okay, maybe one time when I was a kid, I was playing soccer and my mom told me that I needed to go do my chores, and I didn't want to in my heart, but I did it. I did my chores. And I was like, okay, dude, all right, fair enough.
See, some cultures are better than others.
Yeah, and that is a beautiful thing. I'd much rather see someone who obeys their parents because their parents are doing what's right, rather than some kid who their mom tells them to come and take out the trash, and they're mouthing off to their mother and being stiff-necked and obstinate. And so I think that a culture like this, definitely, it's part of the 10 Commandments. Honor your mother and father. This is a command, and again, the severity of this isn't to show that. I think the hope of a law like this is that nobody ever has to do this ever. Just like with eye for an eye. Hey, quit messing around. We don't want to put anybody's eye out. We definitely don't want to put out two eyes. So don't even put out the first one in the first place. So kids, listen to your parents, I think is really the heart of this. But what age? I don't know. So anyway,
and I think
the
age is interesting to me because of the implications of parental oversight, parental responsibility that as I read this, possibly stayed in place in the life of an adult child. It seems to me like if they're a drunkard, I don't know, they're probably not a drunkard at 14, I guess. I don't know enough about the culture, but probably not a drunkard at 14. So, is this talking about somebody who this is an adult son who's still part of the family and still belongs to the family unit, but an adult son who needs to be drug out at 25, 30 years old and stoned. So that presents a new perspective on the parental responsibilities for the parents of adult children, in my mind, potentially.
Yeah, this, as I read this, it just seemed to me that this is most definitely, obviously not talking about some younger child. This is talking about it. At least a teenager, and if a teenager, probably an older teenager. Again, I'm just basing that on, he's a glutton, he's a drunkard. His parents have been trying to discipline him, and he's just refusing the discipline. This is not some little kid. This is an older, an older teenager, perhaps, or maybe even like Greg, like what you just said, very possibly even a full-blown adult. So those are my thoughts.
All right, let's move on to verses 22 and 23 of this same chapter 21. If a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he's put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse shall not hang all night on the tree, but you shall surely bury him on the same day. Open parentheses. For he who is hanged is accursed of God. Close parentheses, so that you do not defile your land, which Yahweh your God has given or gives you as an inheritance. This curse seems to come from God himself. Have we read anything that would explain this or give it, if we ask the question, well, why, we'd have a sufficient answer?
There's no, as far as I know, we haven't read anything that's given us a clear answer to this. But hanging someone on a tree would allow for the desecration of the body by, like, for example, wild animals, or just hanging somebody up and exposing their corpse to the elements would definitely definitely allow for its desecration. So it seems like it's rather than, let's just say, putting the person in like a cave, like a family tomb or something like that, you're showing no respect for them at all.
This doesn't say that they're cursed if they hang more than one day. This is the person who's hung on the tree is cursed by God. At least that's the way I'm reading it. So don't let them hang more than one day. And so would somebody who's been stoned have any more time to be exposed to the elements than someone who's hung on a tree? But there's a special curse that comes along with being hung on a tree that isn't about time. It's their curse because they're hung on a tree. And so just trying to figure out why that, or do we have an explanation, or because God said so?
I think that it has to do with the close association. This is a little bit speculative, but the close association between the curse of sin and death and shame. When you hang a person to publicly display that body, you're putting that person to public shame. And there's all sorts of other scriptures that would get me demerits that you could go to there.
Go ahead.
But I think it has to do with the association between the curse of sin and death and shame. Hanging somebody exposes them to public shame in a way that is sort of peculiar from other punishments and other things that you might do with that body. So I think that's some element of the explanation of the connection there between the hanging and the curse. But
yeah, they're on display. Like they're not.
Yeah.
Like it's not just that they're outside, but that they're being displayed in this way that's.
You're demonstrating something about them. You're demonstrating their guilt. It's a public display of whatever they did to deserve this punishment.
Yeah, they're being exposed in a unique way.
It's interesting then that our choice, apparently, their choice to hang someone on a tree calls down upon that individual the curse of God.
Or is at least demonstrating what they believe to be true. But there's nothing that says that, like, if you stone somebody, that you couldn't then take their dead body and hang it on a tree to display them for all these same reasons. So I think sometimes we assume that the person has to actually die by hanging on the tree. Yeah. We will see how this is taking place in the Old Testament. We don't have to wait even until the New Testament. Obviously, there's a very prominent example in the New Testament. But we'll see some examples of how this plays out in the Old Testament. And oftentimes, I would, at least keep us to... The people might be dead already.
Yeah. And actually, reading verse 22, I think you're right.
And this sounds horrific to us, and of course it is. But also keeping in mind some of the other historical practices, this is not altogether that uncommon. Many cultures used to prominently display people that they killed for their own honor and glory, and their own prowess, or to show their military force and might, or things like that. So this has a different purpose than that. And then they are not to be left. Most of the time, if other cultures were doing this, they're just left there forever, to not only to be potentially desecrated for one day, but to be eaten by the birds, or just to serve as a very prominent, awful example. And so there is some preservation of dignity, but in addition to what you guys are saying, like, this is a special presentation of, if you killed somebody and hung them on a tree, this is a prominent statement, and they are accursed. You don't want that. This is as close as it comes to maybe I'm not advocating this, but like if you were a Muslim and someone buried you with a pig or something like that. This is I think as close as you get to something like that. Like, you are demonstrating this person is under the curse of God and is enduring as much divine disfavor as you could possibly illustrate.
I was and this isn't a biblical example. I was reading about the conquests in extra biblical literature of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and like the things that he used to do with the dead bodies of his enemies to publicly display and to terrify others. So both displaying that same shame and disfavor and all that stuff about these enemies whom he had already conquered, as well as telling the people that he was besieging, this is what's coming for you. Like, cultures did this stuff all the time.
Horrific. Yeah.
And way worse than this.
Much worse.
Absolutely.
No, the restraint of saying you have to bury them after this on the same day is historically uncanny in the restraint that is being expressed compared to things like Sennacherib or any other number of people you could think of.
For sure. Yeah. So let's move on to chapter 22 of Deuteronomy. My question is, why is the sin in verse 5, which is wearing clothing belonging to the opposite gender, why is the sin so offensive to God? Is this command still applicable today? If so, how should it be applied? What are your guys' thoughts on this?
Well, I'm going to answer the applicational or is it still applicable today? And this is a general hermeneutical rule that I use. If I read something like, oh, it's unclean for you, or, oh, don't do that, that's one thing, and maybe it's up for debate. But when I read that this is an abomination to God, this is an abomination to Yahweh, your God, I don't think things that are abominable in his sight later become neutral, or most assuredly not positive. So whatever's being communicated here, whatever principle or whatever, if this is only about practice, I think it's more than that, but surely the principle that's being communicated here, what's being prohibited, if it was an abomination to God, I have absolutely no reason whatsoever to say that God no longer finds that abominable or approves of it.
I think that is a sound hermeneutical principle, and my answer to your question would simply be that I think that this goes back to what we read in Genesis chapter 1, that God created them male and female. He created them in his image. And so if we blur from a biblical perspective, God made human beings, male and female, to bear his image, and to blur those lines is a direct attack or an affront on the image of God himself. And so if any culture, if this culture or any modern culture or anywhere in between, tries to lessen this, Greg, I think that your hermeneutical principle applies. This was an abomination then, and I don't know any reason why it would have changed between then and now, unless we want to say that people are no longer created in the image of God, or that male and female no longer represent that image in some profound way that perhaps goes well beyond what we can even understand. But it is tied to the very nature of the Creator himself, and he expresses here his abhorrence to this practice that would blur those lines.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too that the word that's used here, a woman shall not wear a man's garment, it appears to be a very general word. It can simply mean article. It can mean implement. I've heard people make the argument that it refers oftentimes, and this appears to be true, that which pertains to warfare. You could literally translate this, I think, as a woman shall not wear that which pertains to a man. And if it is that kind of a general principle, then that really is putting this sort of barrier, not only between the sexes and what they are, but also their functions. If men have a particular telos, if God has created man and created women with a particular telos that is appropriate to their sex, then it not only speaks to a man shouldn't think himself to be a woman, but it also speaks to the kinds of things and the kinds of duties we ought to engage in, doesn't it? I at least think so. And I'm not saying there's no overlap between the duties men and women are to engage in. There's obviously overlap. I teach my daughter, Kelsey teaches our daughter. There's obviously overlap, but there are certain peculiarities in the duties and the responsibilities that pertain to males and to females. And I think that this is one of those verses that demonstrates that. Don't take upon yourself that which pertains to a man.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a few different possibilities. I think that what you guys said is true. I think there's probably more than one reason for this. Wearing clothing belonging to the opposite gender is, like Micah, I think this is what you were saying, is against nature. And contrary to modern belief, men's and women's bodies are designed differently, and these differences are brought out by, the unique clothing that each gender wears. Clothing can accommodate these different design, these design differences. Also, a man might wear women's clothing to attract other men, resulting in homosexuality that the Bible condemns. And even later on, in chapter 23, and this was something I read in a commentary, wearing clothing belonging to the opposite sex was often associated with pagan temple prostitution, something condemned in the law. Again, I take a more general view of this. I think all of these things are true. I think that men shouldn't wear women's clothing because it's against nature. I think there's some religious reasons and the homosexual reason. So I kind of think all of these things are true.
Because they're all violating the same core principles, right?
Yes, the same core
natural law
principle is the
principles,
same.
Yeah.
I would add just, again, maybe somebody's watching this and thinks that we're just, a bunch of religious nuts or something like that. And that's fair. That's fine if that's what people think.
I am that. I am
Some
that.
of us are. Oh, sorry.
But lest anybody get confused and think that this is just some sort of religious principle, although most religions would agree with this, right? This isn't something that's unique to Christianity. Muslims would have similar, caveats, or whatever. So there's a lot of world religions that would have this same foundation. But it's not just the religious folks. A book called The Ape Who Understood the Universe is written by, as far as I can understand, a non-theistic evolutionary biologist who just says that, from an evolutionary biological standpoint, which isn't necessarily my worldview, but if that's the worldview you come from, that to deny the realities of biology is ridiculous. That these things are these inherent differences between how we are made, whether we're made that way by a creator or whether we've been made that way by evolution itself, they still end up in almost the same place. That these distinctions between men and women, of course, there is overlap. It's not to say that, men can never be sensitive in any way and women could never be strong or something like that. But these differences, they are what we are. And so to go against those things is to go against reality. And of course, the conclusions of an author like that would say, well, we're going against biology. Here, we're talking about a biblical context. You're going against your creator. And neither is good. It's going to cause some, difficulty, I guess, is maybe the very least of it. But this is, again, a severe response. And we're talking about the biblical perspective. But it's not just a religious conclusion. I mean, non-religious people come to these same conclusions as well. So this isn't something that should just be dismissed with the wave of a hand because some people feel a certain way. The reality of this is agreed upon by evolutionary biologists and Christians, which I don't know if you know, they don't often agree on a lot of stuff, but this is one of the things that they would agree on.
Okay, well, with my next question, I want to do something unique, maybe. We are going to enter a lightning round.
Oh boy!
Oh man!
So to properly participate in this question, you have to provide an answer. We're going to trim this down, verses 5 through 12 of this chapter. I want you, in lightning round fashion, to tell me, read it, tell me if the law is civil, moral, or ceremonial. And then if you want to give a one-sentence answer as to why this is a moral law, a civil law, or a ceremonial law. And according to the rules not established by me, it has to be one of those, because that is the threefold nature of the law. So, Micah, I would love to start with you.
Oh, I was going to go first, and I was going to say pass. I yield my time. I yield my time to Micah.
Okay.
Go.
Lightning round.
Verse 5, I think that's a reflection of the moral law, natural law. Verse 6, I think that's probably in the category of judicial or ceremonial. Because it's tied to living long in the land, which tells me it's positive law attached to the old covenant.
So that's ceremonial law, you said? Just so I'm clear?
I'm going to say well,
hold on, that wasn't one of
either
our... there's a threefold division. I thought it was moral, civil...
Well, judicial and civil are...
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So that...
Yeah.
So somewhere in between...
So we'll just call it ceremonial. We'll just call it ceremonial. I don't...
Okay.
I'm divided between whether it might be ceremonial or civil. But it doesn't really have to do with that. It doesn't seem to have to do with that closely with worship. So I'm going to say civil, actually. And then when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof. You shall not bring the guilt of blood upon your house if anyone should fall from it. That's judicial. But I want to make reiterate
not moral.
something. I want to reiterate something that I've touched on in the past. Judicial laws are just applications of the moral law for a particular people in a particular place. So I want to make it absolutely clear. I'm not saying that these things have nothing to do with God's moral law.
Fair enough.
Just so everyone understands. Okay, verse 9, you shall not sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, lest the whole yield be forfeited, the crop that you've sown, and the yield of the vineyard. You shall not plow an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear cloth of wool and
You're going to
linen
combine all
mixed.
those? Oh, I'm sorry.
I do.
I'm just reading the paragraph
Oh, okay. All right. Gotcha.
as it comes in my Bible. But I think that it probably is all connected conceptually. The mixture of these various things.
Mine the NSB puts them each into different paragraphs. So sorry.
Okay. I think that they're I think they're probably connected conceptually, and that's might be why the ESV has them in one paragraph together for verses 9 through 11. So I'd say ceremonial for that one. It has
9,
to do with,
9, 10, and 9, 10, and 11 are all ceremonial.
I think so, because I think it has to do with the distinction of this people from the rest of the peoples.
So you shall not plow with an
the Lord.
ox and a donkey together as a ceremonial law.
Yeah, I think because once again, I think it's one of those boundary markers between Israel and the nations around them. I think I can, if I had oxen and donkeys, I think if I had those things going in my fields today, I don't think there's any law prohibiting me from using both of those at the same time. Verse 12, you shall make for yourself tassels on the four corners of the garment with which you cover yourself, ceremonial.
That's the longest lightning round of all time, I think we've done.
Well, I wanted to make sure both me
He set you up for failure on the lightning round. It was a longer task.
Only because you had to read it, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Who's up next, Greg?
I'm done. I'm not.
Oh yeah, you're
Joe
on.
says, I'm not participating.
Joe says,
I reject the buckets, and I'm not doing it. So, but,
Okay.
Eric, would you define them differently, or is that?
Were there any you disagreed with there?
I don't think so, except maybe the only one that I think I might, I just don't know, I'm uncertain about is verses 6 and 7 about the every other thing that Micah said I agreed with, but in 6 and 7 it's not entirely clear why you can take the young but you got to leave the mother. One interpretation is because if you leave the mother, you're keeping the species going, and so I guess it sounds like this is dealing with like creation itself, stewardship over creation. If that is the case, there might be a moral aspect to this, but it's difficult to say. I'm kind of undecided somewhat on that, but I guess it would depend on why, like what the justification is for this. But
so once again, you could say that it's civil and still say it's in it, but there's a particular time-bound, certain people, certain place application of God's moral law, because that's what all civil law is.
Yes.
All civil law is just God's, the principles in God's moral law applied to a specific people in a specific place at a specific time that might not be applied to every people in every place in every time in exactly the same way.
Exactly. And that's why, so I told Greg this actually before the show. I said that I was going to cheat. And some of these things seem like you could say, well, it's civil and moral. There's some obviously the two are connected, right? Like they're not completely different.
I think in our conversation you said you wanted to answer one civil/ceremonial.
Yeah.
Well, and so this kind of just goes
moral,
point, right?
I think.
Like again,
anyway, go ahead.
Definitions are important. And yes, if you defined ceremonial law as anything that works to set this people apart, then sure, right? That becomes really easy. And any moment you're willing to say, civil/ceremonial, okay. But I think that goes to my point that, in the point I think Joe's making,
civil/moral, but go ahead,
or whatever, right? Like however we make these buckets, we come across something, it goes, that doesn't quite fit. So I'm going to expand my bucket just a little bit more. And look, this bucket's starting to run into this bucket. But in order to continue to make sense of things, maybe our buckets don't have well-defined edges. And so we have wiggly edges and maybe some gray edges. I think the point that Joe's making as he abstains from this is like, I just deny the idea of rigid buckets in the first place. And if that's not what Joe's saying, that's what I'm saying. There are some things that I don't think are helpful. We've created systems, and now everything has to fit into that system because it's our system. And I'm not convinced it's always helpful.
This is why the broader category of positive law, I think, is important, because positive law is covenant specific. Positive law is laws that are not inherently moral in and of themselves, but they are attached to covenants for particular purposes of God within a particular people at a particular place. So
You're
if you have the
probably
broader-
you're probably right, but all I hear you doing is going, I recognize that not everything fits in my bucket, so I'm going to make another bucket, so now I can fit
No.
everything in that bucket.
It's just making
good
a
for you,
distinction.
man. That's great.
It's just making a distinction between genus and species. Okay, like there are more narrow categories, and then there are broader categories.
Would you agree if I said, in all likelihood, the people who received this didn't sit around thinking, conceptualizing, arguing about which is civil, which is moral, which is positive, which is like that? Just they're like, no, this is the law. Like this is what we were told to do.
Yeah, but it's not. I don't think it's that simple, though. I think there were some laws where if you broke the law, you were forbidden from worship, right? Like there were other laws where if you broke the law, you were stoned at the gate.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to get a demerit for this, but it's okay.
Greg especially says it's okay.
So think about like the ordinances.
Bless you, my son.
The ordinances of the church in the new covenant. Okay, like. Is there anything like attached to the 10 Commandments or to natural law, to God's moral law, how he made the world, that says you need to take this piece of bread and this fruit of the vine and you're going to observe the Lord's death through this? Is there anything inherently moral about that? Like in and of itself, like there's something that obligates you to do this by virtue of you being made in the image of God? No, it's not inherently.
So is that a
moral.
ceremonial law for Christians then?
It's a form of positive law. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that there's this broad category of positive law. Positive laws are attached to covenants, and they're attached to covenants to express God's purposes within those covenants. So God has purposes for this old covenant people. And the positive laws that he gives in the context of this covenant, whether it be the judicial laws or civil laws or ceremonial laws, they express the purposes of God for that people in that covenant. They're tied to the moral law. Many times they're applications of the moral law, but they're not inherently moral in and of themselves until God says, this is what you're going to do.
I think when you get to the New Testament, it becomes, the distinctions become blatant. Not in every case, but we just got done reading. We just got done reading about if, and again, there's some. We were talking more about this after the show, but the point is, if an animal died of itself, the Jew was not, or the Israelite, I should say, could not consume that animal, but the Gentile could. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you there's something. This is not just some universal thing. This is something that is unique to the Israelite because of his covenant with God. The Gentile foreigner has no such covenant. Therefore, this does not apply. So it's not. I mean, even the law itself makes certain distinctions, but again, those distinctions are not always clear. And the Israelite, no doubt, took all these commands together, and they weren't dividing them up like we would today.
Yeah, I am not nearly as opposed to the positive law category as I made it out. I'm trying to be a little bit provocative. Yet there are things, and I think I'm going to get my first demerit in weeks, right? We see Paul talking about the need to provide for those who minister to Christians, citing you don't muzzle the ox, right? And you go, he uses that positive law for that covenant that we wouldn't say is moral, that I don't know, it's probably not ceremonial because it's talking about how you're plowing your fields. He uses that to justify that ground is the ground for this positive law. And so again, I don't find the categories as helpful as we pretend they are. And again, I've used the categories. I will use the categories. I'm not against them. Just as the four of us sit around here have this conversation, I'd like to be able to talk about how maybe we need to not be so rigidly tossing these things into buckets so that we can dump one bucket out the window and keep the rest.
This is why, once again, I don't mean to be repetitive here. These are applications. These laws, these civil laws, they're applications of moral principles. meant for a specific people at a specific time. They don't necessarily transcend covenantal boundaries, but they are nevertheless applications of moral principles. So if you're asking the question, what is the principle underneath the don't muzzle the ox while he treads out the grain that Paul points to? Paul himself tells you in 1 Timothy chapter 5, starting in verse 17. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. Is Paul pinning the authority just on that civil law? No, it's on the principle underneath it. And the laborer deserves his wages. What is he saying? The laborer deserves his wages. Paul is appealing to do not steal. That's what he's appealing to. He's appealing to not stealing from somebody that's offered you a service or done something for you for which they deserve remuneration. That's the natural law principle. That's the moral law principle. The not muzzling an ox while it treads out the grain is an application for that particular people in that particular place that demonstrates that principle. It doesn't transcend to all peoples, but the moral law principle does. I wanted to flesh that out because I hope that the connection is helpful.
Fair enough. Well, for the sake, Eric, did you have anything to add on this before we move on?
No, go ahead.
All right. Well, Mike, I appreciate the clarification, and for the sake of time, let's press forward. I had mentioned earlier in our episode, if people weren't offended by the previous thing that was asked, there's something that they almost certainly would be offended by later. It's basically the rest of this chapter from verse 13 on to the end. My Bible heads these things up on laws on morality. So if they were putting them into a bucket, these are moral laws. And I, quite frankly, I don't know too many non-believers who would read a section like this and think that there are immoral things that are included in this. That almost the Old Testament is advocating for something that they would say, by whatever standard that they have, are actually immoral. I'm certainly not going to do the lightning round thing where we got to go through all this or whatever, but is there anything that we didn't say in our previous potentially offensive section that needs to be said with these areas, or anything that you guys wanted to get into in here? I didn't want to just skip over this section, but I'm also I'm not particularly interested in going into great detail into every single verse in this part. Well,
these verses need to be read very, very, very carefully. I had saw this YouTube video where this woman was using these verses to show that the Bible allows for rape, and if you read these verses carefully, the language is subtle, but there are clear distinctions that are made between these verses. I don't need to spend all the time on this, but in verse 25, the man forces her and lies with her. This verses 25 through 27 are clearly talking about rape, and the punishment for that was death. So yes, the Bible does condemn the act. It was a capital crime punishable by death. There's no question about that. But in verse 28, when it says seizes her, at first glance, this sounds like maybe rape is in view here. But this apparently has a different meaning than forces in verse 25. I think in this situation, a man pursues a woman for sex, and the woman consents to the act, because it goes on to say they are discovered, not just he is discovered, but they are discovered. The language is subtle, but it implies that the woman was consenting to the act. She was not forced. So because they're both put to death, this is not talking about rape. This is talking about something that is consensual and against the law. So I'll just. Again, the main point I'm trying to make is the language is very subtle here, but if you read it very carefully and you compare it with the context, to me, this is clearly condemning rape in verses 25 through 27, but the following verses, or at least verse 28, is talking about something different. So I'll leave it at that.
So most of the commentators that I've read, and maybe you're reading different people than I have, agree that this verse 2 is talking about rape in verse 28. It is a different Hebrew word than is used, but most of them that I've read agree that this is talking about rape. However, and this is one of the reasons I think that the category of civil law is important, because there are people that try to even some people in like very reformed camps, like known as theonomists, who try to say the judicial law or the civil law of Israel is the pattern on which all nations need to base their civil laws. And what I want to recognize is once again, the principle of positive law that says that these are applications given to a specific people at a specific time for particular reasons that are confined to that people. For instance, like, do you understand, for instance, the difference between these situations in verses 25 through 27 and 28 and 29 appears to me at least to be that one deals with a woman who is betrothed and another deals with a virgin, someone who's not betrothed. That appears to be one of the main differences to me.
Let me make one clarification really quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologize for that. So when I said they're both put to death, that's actually, I was mistaken about that. That's verses 23 and 24. So I misspoke on that. So I just want to clarify that. Go ahead, finish your point. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. So there's, if indeed it is speaking of rape in verse 28, then what's the main difference between the situation in verses 25 through 27 and 28 and 29? One of the women is betrothed, or she's either betrothed to be married, or she's married, or whatever. In verse 28, she's not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her. And she's not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they're found, then the man who lays with her will give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he's violated her. Now, obviously, the liberals will light their hair on fire about this and say, well, this is so, like, you're saying that, he can just purchase her from the girl's father if he does this heinous act of evil. And what I want to say is you don't understand that culture. Because if this had happened to somebody in that culture, do you have any idea the ramifications for this young woman for the rest of her life? Even if this was like not something she wanted to be involved in. Like, she could very well go the rest of her life with nobody ever wanting to marry her, with going childless. If certain men in her family die, like what happens if the men in her family die? She's going to be destitute, homeless, nowhere to live, without any way of supporting herself. Like, she could be in serious danger here. If it is talking about rape in verse 28, you could still see a situation where this might be an act of mercy of God the mercy of God in this situation. Because now he has to own up to what he's done. He has to go to her father. By the way, it doesn't ever say that the father or the woman have to agree to this situation. If what it is talking about in verse 28 is indeed rape. But you can see that if that is the correct interpretation, this would be it would be an application of God's law that is very bound to that culture. Very bound to the aspects of daily life that attended them in that world. And there would be no reason to apply that kind of a thing in our world. Like, if somebody were to take advantage of my unbetrothed daughter, like, I think our legal system should put that person to death. We have no such culture that would make, it impossible for my daughter to live or, whatever after that were to happen. Okay. So, those are just a couple of thoughts. I don't know if this is actually talking about perhaps Eric's right, and it's talking about a consensual act. Most of what I've read says no, but.
Well, I think, and again, like I said before, the language is very subtle. And so it could be that it sounds to me like the woman initially she wasn't pursuing the man like the man was pursuing her. She wasn't pursuing the man at all. It sounds to me like the man is the one who initiates this. And
my understanding of that society, that would have been the normal operation. It would have been somewhat abnormal for the woman to begin the pursuit.
Right. Yeah. But this is more than just pursuing an engagement. This is like, there's no engagement here at all. This guy is just, go ahead.
I want to ask a question to Micah. You referred to theonomists, people who want to live under a God law, how you separate theonomy. And I think I picked up on you use that mildly pejorative, maybe. Those people who think that God's law ought to dictate how every society sets up their law. And to some degree, I would say I am a theonomist, and that I'm looking forward to one day living under the perfect law of God as it's established in the eschaton. And I would probably go so far as to say that, some level of theonomy wouldn't be all that bad right now. We'd have to define exactly what we mean by that. But let me ask you, let's say there was a society that used, or if not the principles laid out here, what do you think civilizations ought to be basing their laws on?
Yeah, the moral law of God. So once again, if you keep your category, and this is why categories are helpful, if you keep the category of moral law and positive law distinct, where positive laws are attached to covenants, so you have various distinctions within the positive law, and they're time-bound, people-specific, covenantally oriented applications of moral law principles. If you have that, then you can say, okay, well, if I'm not a part of this covenant, if my nation is not part of this covenant, then how can I take those same moral law principles? So 10 commandments. I mean, I think all 10 are in force. 10 commandments.
But we don't agree on that.
How can I take the 10 commandments and have them be reflected in our society? And I think that some of that is up to wisdom, but I don't think it's a copy and paste from the Old Testament civil code.
No, I don't think any theonomist, no theonomist that I've ever heard, or anybody that calls himself a theonomist.
Have you read some of the old guys? Like some of the Christian Reconstructionists?
I'm not going to pretend to be exhaustively knowledgeable on everyone who has been labeled or labels himself a theonomist. But there is an example, I think, where you'd say that the muzzling of an ox wasn't a positive law. Maybe you would say it was a positive law because it was a law only attached to the covenant, and it wasn't a moral law, so therefore you shouldn't establish it. But Paul kind of says you should always establish. Again, it just kind of goes to
Paul goes to the moral law principle. It's in the principles, thou shalt not steal. So that's why he's saying you should pay your ministers. He's saying don't steal from what they've earned.
Not paying them well, right? I don't think anybody was arguing don't pay them.
Yeah, he's saying pay them a fair wage.
Some people say don't pay them.
He's saying pay them a fair wage. He's saying don't steal from them. So that's a moral law principle that he's pointing to. So like he's using that as an object lesson.
But if nothing else, we do have to come to the argument. We would eventually have to address the argument that there are people who say, again, I'm not trying to beat the drum on the Sabbath law, but that's not moral. Therefore,
yeah, I'm not one of those people. Yeah, I think that is moral.
So where we decide to draw our buckets once again would, if we were trying to establish, if the four of us were responsible.
Were you including Eric's dog just now?
I don't know. I saw 4 screens on my monitor.
Me,
and I'm like,
Joe,
and I'm
Greg,
here.
Eric, and Lola.
So if the 4 of us were responsible if someone gave us the power to define laws for our society, and we use what's just been laid out, we would instantly be presented with an issue where we wouldn't, at least on its face, be able to come to an agreement.
Yeah, no, that's true. For the sake of time, why don't we move forward? But we're probably not going to solve all those issues now. But I appreciate your guys' thoughts, and I'm not trying to be short. But why don't we dive into our last chapter before we run out of time?
Yeah, my question for Deuteronomy 23 is, what is the reason for the law in verse 8? This law just seems strange to me, at least at first glance. Actually, you got to read verse 7 first. It says, you shall not detest an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not detest an Egyptian, because you were an alien in his land. The sons of the 3rd generation who are born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. Why the sons of the 3rd generation and not anybody else?
I don't know.
All right, next question.
Well, I also don't know, but you said it but then you seem to suggest that you have an answer. So why don't you just tell us what you think about it?
I'm going to throw out just a desperate, wild guess, because that's all this is. But remember that Israel has just come out of Egypt, right? And the Edomites, they are the relatives of the Israelites, because you have Jacob and Esau, and the Edomites are the descendants of Esau. Israelites are the descendants of Jacob. it seems to me like there was some tension between these groups. And so maybe by saying, if I'm reading this right, the sons of the third generation who are born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. I wonder if the language is very, very vague. So I don't know when it says it's born to them. I'm assuming that means a native Edomite and a native Egyptian. It could be saying that we need to wait until tensions die down a bit before we start accepting these people in this way. I mean, especially this particularly applies to the Egyptians, because remember, Israel just came out of Egypt not really that long before. But then again, there could be some other reason. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a desperate wild guess.
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, last question then for us. There's a verse in chapter 23, 12 to 14. Obviously, we all have indoor plumbing and stuff like that, so we don't have to, defecate outside. But the interesting aspect of this is just the casual nature with which it says, God walks among you, so cover up your feces. Any thoughts on this at all? Do you just breeze past this when you're reading, or do you have any other thoughts about this? Anything that you'd like to add before we conclude our discussion today?
Ceremonial. That's my only thought.
See, now that's how you do a lightning round right there.
I've meditated many, many months on this passage.
I doubt it.
I have nothing to add that wouldn't be silliness.
I kind of agree with what Micah said. I think there's a ceremonial aspect to this, although there's also a cleanliness aspect too. You deal with your business in the proper place. But
the fact that it's specifically tied though to God's presence amongst them is that doesn't.
It might sound like
okay.
Well, the ceremonial law did the same thing. It was actually that's almost entirely what the ceremonial law was about, was being able to enter God's presence as long as you are jumping through these ceremonial hoops, so to speak. And again, I don't say
there
that
is a difference
with
between
disrespect.
This was them entering God's presence, and this is the fact that God is present. That His presence extends to the fact that you need to go outside the camp and bury your waste. That is a difference, and so whether you want to call that a ceremony, again, I can see that I'm going to lose this battle of trying to get us to unmoor, and that's fine. I've lost better battles than that, but
I'm not unhitching.
We'll let this be the last, since you guys don't seem to have much interest in conversating about this particular thing much more, so that's fine. We don't get reminded of God's presence literally amongst them, and especially even outside, right? We know God's presence dwells in the tabernacle. Eventually we know that we'll dwell in the temple, which seems like that will be built at some point in the future. Demerit. Another demerit for me again. Fair enough. But now this is like it's an odd place to remind them that God's presence is among them generally. And of all the places for this to come up again, that's why it strikes me as so strange. And God's like, by the way, cover up your excrement, because I walk among you. Like I'm a part of this. I'm a part of your camp. For whatever reason, just stands out to me. And while it could be a silly conversation, that's not what I'm trying to invite you guys into. I'm reminded of this beautiful truth that God's presence isn't just confined to the tabernacle that they constructed for His glory to dwell in, that even if they don't realize it, there is some practical application to the fact that God walks among them, whatever that means. And I think that is a interesting thing that is worth dwelling on. Eric, I think you were being a little tongue-in-cheek, but that principle...
I take this verse seriously, though. I don't, and I know I was kidding about that, but I don't want to dismiss this, because the statement "I walk among you" is a big deal. And
that's a big deal,
and I don't take that lightly.
So, all right, well, that's what we've got for our show today. That's what we think. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Feel free to leave us a comment. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Do you have a better way of 3 buckets to divide the law? Something else that you want to discuss? Anything that we left out that we should have discussed? Let us know down in the comments below. We'd be happy to see that. And until we see you again, friends, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.
Doubt it, but